Okay, I think we have success. Does that work?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Hello, my name's Becky, and this is my colleague of quite a few years, Preet. Can you give everyone a wave? Okay, brilliant. So Preet and I have been working in software testing for a combined 15 years, and we've worked in around 15 different companies between us. Today, we're going to be talking to you about adaptive testing, but just before we do that, I'd like to understand who we've actually got in the audience. So, if you are a developer, please raise your hand. Oh, a lot of you, who'd have thought it? Is anybody a tester? Yes! We are not alone! I really thought there would be one person. That's brilliant. Does anybody not identify as either a developer or a tester? Hello. I don't know what you do. So, what we're going to talk to you today about, we're going to introduce the concept of the adaptive tester. We're going to break down some categories of teams that we've worked with in the past, and we're going to walk you through them. And what we're hoping is, even if you don't work in testing directly, that you still recognize some of the patterns that we're going to be describing to you, whether it's from your past or your present.
So one of the issues that we have come across is that everyone has a different opinion about what perfect looks like for a team which is trying to incorporate testing into their process. While none of those opinions are wrong necessarily, it's just that testing can be arranged in so many different ways that one approach which works perfectly for one team may completely fail for another team. So when we were preparing for this talk, Becky and I sat down and we had a think about the different teams we had worked with and how we approached testing in all those teams. And then we realized that the role we did in each of those teams was vastly different, and we displayed different behavior in all those teams. In some teams, we were hands-on, we were creating test frameworks and writing automated tests. And whereas in some other teams, we were acting more as consultants, and we were guiding the team towards testing solutions and better practices. And we also worked in some teams where we were constantly running to catch up to the developers who wanted to release their software as soon as possible with no regards to tests at all.
So we reflected on these behaviors that we'd been demonstrating with these teams, and we settled on the idea that we were adapting our testing approach depending on the team that we were working with. We were adapting based on a few different factors. So what kind of people were in the team? Were they people who already saw value in testing? Were they people who proactively considered testing in their day-to-day role? What level of maturity was the team's process at? Were they already a team that self-organized well? Did the ideas of pairing or flexible roles excite them or scare them? And thirdly, what skills did we have at that point in time, or what skills did we want to develop? To be honest, I don't believe that there is a perfect definition of testing. I've seen teams with many testers releasing low-quality software. I've seen teams with no testers releasing high-quality software. I've seen everything in between. And it's important that as testers we remember that, so that we don't just blindly apply the same behavioral patterns for every team that we work with. So bearing that in mind, Preet and I would like to introduce to you today the concept of the adaptive tester.
So who is this miraculous adaptive tester? Adaptive tester is the one who works with the team and has the ability to recognize what is the maturity level of the team in terms of understanding and attitude towards testing. All the teams are different, and they all operate in a different way. Some teams have people who believe that testing is not needed at all, and whereas there are some teams who are desperate for guiding around testing. And so after working with all these different teams, we have understood that there will always be some people in some teams who would never be able to like testing, and that's okay. Because we know that there are also some people who completely adore testing. Well, they are out there somewhere. You have me and Becky for the start. So one of the skills an adaptive tester needs to know is when to give the team what they want and when to give the team what they need. Adaptive testers are the ones who not only focus on the end goal of how the testing should look like, but they also be able to identify and implement small changes which would guide the team towards the right direction. And after reflecting on our past careers, We found out that we had been known with different titles and we did different roles. So after reflecting on all those different roles and titles, we thought of identifying some common themes between the teams we had worked with. And after several attempts, we settled down on 5 different teams. And today we would like to talk you through those 5 different teams and how we adapted our testing skills to suit with those teams.
So the first team category that we'd like to introduce to you is the team in denial. What we've noticed about teams that we've worked with is that particularly when a team is newly formed, they often consider testing as an afterthought. Teams in this situation have generally, up until this point, not believed that they have enough of a product to warrant testing, and they've also assumed that the people in the team can cope with whatever testing work needs to be done. The team in denial have now, whether it's 1, 2, 3 years later, reached a point where they no longer believe that this is feasible, so they've made the decision to try and bring testing into their process. As adaptive testers, we know that we can't take this team and immediately move them into an all-singing, all-dancing, test-loving team. So we start small and we work with what we have. We also don't want to go into heavy. Terms such as BDD or pairing they represent quite a lot of change for those teams and can be quite scary to the team in denial. Additionally, we may have an end goal for this team to introduce an automation framework, for example. But what we need to avoid is introducing that framework almost immediately, because there is a risk that we could become the people solely responsible for that framework, and later that could lead to us becoming a bottleneck. So instead, what we want to do is slowly introduce the idea of testing. And that process can take much longer than most people think. You can't just take a team in denial, chuck a couple of testers in, and hope that in a couple of months they're going to be amazing at testing. That's not how it works. So what does an adaptive tester do in this case? Well, the first thing is that we want to get the team thinking about testing. We want to get invited to or introduce the concept of kickoffs. We want to start asking questions of the functionality. We want to query the implementation details. We want to bring up edge cases that people may not have thought about. Secondly, we want to get the team thinking about how they might test the different requirements. It might be that some of the requirements need unit tests, some might need functional tests, some might need manual tests, and that's okay, but it's important that we get the team having that discussion before they pick a piece of functionality up. Our main goal when working with a team in denial is to demonstrate the value that thinking about testing up front can bring.
So the next team we came up with was the fearful team. These were generally the teams that had accepted the need for testing and then run with it, and then run way, way too far with it. These teams tended to have products that had a growing user base and a very vocal user base, and they had fear of breaking even the smallest of experience for their user. I worked at a company a couple of years ago in the fearful team. The team had become overly cautious of introducing even the smallest of changes because of the fear of criticism from their users and product owners. The system in this example was difficult to automate and complicated. So over a number of years, the team had continued to enhance their manual testing process and made it more and more complex. So what was my approach with this team, which believed that more testing meant better quality? So one of the main issues with this team was their overly engineered, heavily manual testing process. So I believe if you can move a team away from running thousands of scripted tests, you have a chance to move them to a healthier testing practices, for example, exploratory testing. But because this team was following this process from a long time, so you just can't go into the team and rip off this comfort blanket away from them. You need to be able to persuade the management or the team about where the testing would bring more value. What we found in the end, that we were able to reduce the number of tests being run without impacting the test coverage and without increasing the risk of more defects. So next step was to analyze if we can automate any of the boring regression tests which team had to run again and again in every release. So we identified some candidates and we automated those tests. That freed up the team more to do the exploratory testing. And the final and the most difficult part was to convince the product owners that not every bug is a showstopper. Because they were scared of breaking even the smallest of experience for the users, they were marking even the simple UI bugs as showstoppers, and which was putting a lot of pressure on the team because they had to fix all the bugs before the release. So the main goal in the fearful teams is to try to remove some of the fears away from the team, whether it is about reducing the number of tests being run in a skillful way, or maybe guiding them to know their defects in a better way.
So the third team category is the legendary automation team. Often when we work with a team, people in that team tell us wild legends of a possibly mythical contractor who may or may not have sat on the 6th floor. Nobody's really sure if they've seen this person, but one thing's for sure, this contractor wrote one hell of a lot of feature files. They also wrote a massive test automation framework that tested every single piece of functionality on every single version of every single browser, and it was amazing. So this legendary test framework that nobody can actually find the code for anymore is unfortunately rarely the stuff of dreams. It's more usually a couple of boxes under someone's desk, cranking out thousands of Selenium tests with nobody looking at the output. So one of the things that we focus on with the legendary automation team is exploring the concept of useful automation. As adaptive testers at this point, we can choose. We can either flex our technical muscles, roll up our sleeves, and start writing a new framework, or we can pop our consultant hats on and try and guide the team in that direction. Just a quick word of warning, it can be quite tempting to try and locate the test framework. I wouldn't advise it, but please go ahead and try. So what do we mean by the concept of useful automation? We like to keep the barrier to entry as low as possible for our tests. If people on your team can't find, set up, or run those tests, then they're probably just not going to bother. We also like to keep a zero-tolerance approach to flaky tests. If you have a test that's consistently failing but no corresponding bug in your application, then what's going to happen is your team is going to lose faith in that framework pretty quickly. Speed of execution is really important. If you have tests that take hours instead of minutes or preferably seconds, then those tests aren't giving you the fast feedback that you need. Additionally, the longer a test run, the increased chance of external influences affecting the output and the validity of those test results. We've often seen teams who initially try and focus all of their effort on automating from the UI. And what they tend to do is forget about their unit tests. So what we end up with is, as I think it was Alistair Scott wrote in one of his blog posts, we end up with the ice cream cone of test. So what we're trying to do with these teams is encourage them back towards the traditional test pyramid. The final area of useful automation is test code quality. What we often see with teams is a set of manual testers who are asked by their manager or whoever to put a couple of scripts together, just automate a bit of it. Great. But what you've done is you've taken brilliant testers and you've turned them into terrible developers. And it's not really their fault. But then what's even worse is we're shocked, we're appalled when nobody else wants to touch that automation that they've written. Doesn't seem to make much sense. So our main goal with a legendary automation team is to try and enable people to understand the concept of useful automation.
So the next team category is the desperate team. This stage of testing tends to be based around the teams, which are reasonably fast-paced agile teams, with devs and testers who have an idea what they are building, and they have a robust infrastructure supported with some useful automation. Well, that sounds perfect. So why is this team upset? Unfortunately, in a lot of these teams, the testers have taken the sole ownership of the test framework and have successfully managed to become the bottlenecks to the framework. At this point, if one of the automation testers gets hit by a bus, the team would try to hire another one to replace them. But unfortunately, finding automation testers is really hard. It's just me and Becky who find fun in this job. So with a team like this, while they may have useful automation at this moment, it will not last for a long time because no one else other than the testers knows about the framework. So we try to coach. So what we do in this case, we try to coach the team as a whole in this case, having a small team of testers who know how the framework hangs together and how to read the reports is no good. What happens when the testers go on holiday? So we need to ensure that test framework is easy to maintain and is accessible to the whole team. Everyone on the team should be able to look at the test results and decide if the build is good to go to the production or not. One of the things that we have tried with these teams is pairing between the testers and developers. So that helps testers to get better technically because they get feedback from the developers. And it also helps developers to know more about the framework, how to add tests, where to read reports, and in short, they get more familiar to the framework. Another thing which we can try in these teams is try to write the test framework in the similar tech stack as the developers work with. So once I moved to a team which had tests in Ruby and Cucumber, but the application was written in C#. And after I moved to that team as a single tester with 5 developers, we had a chat amongst ourselves, and collectively we decided to write our tests in C# and SpecFlow. So I paired up with the developers, we came up with a framework together, and now we have 6 people in our team who understand the framework and can write the tests. So now when I'm on holiday, I don't have to worry about what's happening to my tests. And similarly, developers don't have to do a lot of context switching when they're writing tests in my absence. So that's like a win-win situation for all of us in the team.
So the final team category that we came up with was team acceptance. We haven't actually heard anybody say the quote on this slide, but we know that deep down they're thinking it. We tend to work with the team up until we see indicators of acceptance. These indicators can be wide-ranging, they can be multiple things. But some of the indicators are proactive communication with testers, looking at and understanding the automated tests, writing new tests and maintaining the test framework without being asked, and coming up with new suggestions, whether it's about removing pain from an existing manual testing process or suggestions for how to improve an automated framework. As adaptive testers, we strive to get teams towards acceptance, but we also need to be able to recognize once a team reaches this stage. It's not that we won't need to be a part of the team anymore, although that's an option. What we want is to no longer be driving testing in quite the same way, and we can take a step back and let the team stand alone.
So after talking about all these different teams, we thought that adaptive tester needs to have a certain skills. So the first and foremost being the communication. So we need to be able to communicate and persuade the teams. We need to be able to communicate effectively, whether it is something as simple as pairing up with the developer to write some tests, or updating the management about the test results, or it could be convincing a team which has been badly burnt by bad testing in the past to give you another chance. We need to be able to lead without authority. If we need to implement lasting change, then we need to gain the confidence and trust of the team so that they listen to us and are receptive towards the changes we suggest, and they are able to see the value we are trying to add. We need to be able to coach and mentor, whether it's training people on how to write tests, helping teams to stand alone, or working with the individuals to help see them the value of tests. Technical understanding is very important. You need to understand the impact of the change being made to the code base. You need to understand how the releases for that product work, how the different environments work, and how the different components interact with each other.
So as part of the preparation for this talk, we ran a survey across a set of testing professionals. We asked them to tell us what the top 3 skills they believed a tester needed were. These were the results. Some of the responses were not actually skills, but we included them anyway for completeness. As could be expected, skills such as communication and analysis rated really highly. Some of the less obvious entries included skills such as imagination, empathy, patience, and tenacity. Throughout this talk, we've been exploring what skills you might need for adaptive testing. For me, one of the key differences between testing as opposed to other disciplines is that it's highly likely as a tester that you'll be a minority in your team, and that even if you are not that senior in your own field, you may still need to implement change in that team without necessarily having the support or the authority to do so. That's why it's really important from the start of a tester's career to help them develop not just their technical analysis or testing skills, but also to help them understand that holistic view of where a team is on their testing journey. Too often have I seen testers rush headlong into a team, and I've done this myself, and try and shortcut that team to a particular end goal without taking the time to help that team make the change themselves in a sustainable way. Okay, so we've talked you through the concept of the adaptive tester, and we've walked through a couple of team categories. What I thought might be quite nice to round things off is for me to give you some information about the testing journey that we've been on at Just Eat. Just for a bit of context, the team that I joined when I joined Just Eat were the web team who were working on the public-facing website. This is a screenshot from the website. You may or may not recognize it. The team that I was working with were a mixture of back-end API developers and front-end devs. So when I joined Just Eat, this team were definitely in the legendary automation stage of existence. They'd had several attempts at creating the ultimate test framework. They'd had lots of people from the team had picked this framework up, dabbled with it a little bit, and then dropped it. As a result of this, a contractor had been brought in. Now, this guy had done a great job. He'd managed to resurrect that framework, he'd got it running, and then what he was working on was interacting with the team to try and help them find use in that framework. The framework was written in Ruby. By the time I joined the team, there was a single build, and it was running all of those tests. Unfortunately, that build was taking about 4 hours and was usually red. So my initial goal was to try and regain that team's trust in the idea of testing. And I had to use a number of skills to do that. I had to persuade management to purchase some AWS instances. I had to analyze the output from the test. I had to remove the flaky and the unnecessary ones. I had to use my technical skills to split the tests out, to parallelize them, and to move some of them into a headless framework. I also had to work with the developers to enable them to run a subset of those tests pre-commit. The result of this initial goal was a reduction in the build time from 4 hours to 10 minutes. Not bad. We had some visible results, and we managed to move the team from a fortnightly release to an every other day release. That felt pretty good. My second goal, though, was to enable this team to pick the framework up themselves. And that was kind of where everything fell apart. I felt like I was doing all the right things. I was pairing with the developers. I was trying to help enable them. But there was still a lack of enthusiasm. And then it happened. The golden moment. One of the devs proposed writing some in-memory integration tests in C#. His reasoning was this might help remove some of the pain from the expensive UI tests. And that, for me, was the indicator of acceptance that I'd been waiting for.
So that's the end of our talk. Thank you very much for listening. Does anybody have any questions?